An elderly veteran steps onto a TV stage, trembling, clutching a small invention he believes can save lives. Seconds later, the judges laugh him off as impossible. The crowd turns cold until one man stands. Keanu Reeves. His next words change everything, and the world will never forget what happens next. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow, we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The stage lights of the greatest inventor glowed like molten gold. Cameras swept across rows of cheering faces, catching every gasp, every smile. The host's voice boomed through the auditorium, full of TV enthusiasm. Next up, we have a special contestant who says his invention could change how we save lives during natural disasters. Please welcome Frank Dalton. A single spotlight cut through the haze. From behind the curtain stepped a man who looked out of the bare place among the sleek suits and modern tech displays. His back was slightly bent, his movements careful but steady. His silver hair was neatly combed, his wrinkled hands holding a small black case. When he reached center stage, he paused, blinking at the blinding light. The audience's clapping faded to polite curiosity. He wasn't what they expected. He wasn't young or charismatic. He was old, with a faint tremor in his hand and a quiet dignity that came from somewhere deeper than show business. He cleared his throat and adjusted the microphone. "Good evening," he began, his voice thin but sincere. "My name is Frank Dalton. I served in the United States Army for 24 years. I'm here to show you something I've been working on since the day I came home." Behind him, a cloth-covered table stood ready. He lifted the cover to reveal a compact metallic drone, rough around the edges, but unmistakably handmade. A few murmurs rippled through the audience. One of the judges, a young tech entrepreneur named Evan, leaned toward his mic and smirked. "That's quite the gadget, Mr. Dalton. What does it do?" Frank nodded, his shoulders straightening. "This," he said, patting the small drone, "is designed to lift heavy debris like concrete or collapsed walls. It's meant to help trapped victims after earthquakes or explosions. It runs on a dual-motor magnetic thrust system I designed myself." Laughter trickled from somewhere in the back rows. One of the judges whispered to another, "That's impossible without advanced stabilization tech." Frank continued, as if he hadn't heard, "I built it with limited materials, but I've tested the concept on small-scale simulations. It could save lives, fast, especially in places where time means everything." The lead judge, a former NASA engineer named Dr. Maddox, folded his arms. "So you're telling us this device, built in your garage, can do what million-dollar prototypes can't?" His tone was sharp, challenging. Frank hesitated. "Sir, I'm saying that sometimes innovation comes from necessity, not resources." The crowd was restless now. The host tried to lighten the mood. "Well, let's see this miracle machine in action, shall we?" Frank nodded and reached for the controller. His hands shook slightly as he powered it on. A faint hum filled the stage. The drone's small rotors began to spin, trembling in mid-air. The audience leaned forward, eyes wide. For a moment, it seemed to work. Then a flicker, a spark. The drone tilted violently, knocking into a nearby display board with a dull thud before dropping to the floor. The lights dimmed for a split second. A sharp collective gasp echoed through the studio. Frank froze. The silence pressed down like a weight. He knelt to pick up the fallen drone, his hands trembling harder now. A faint trail of smoke rose from one rotor. Dr. Maddox sighed. "Sir, this competition is about results, not intentions." Frank looked up, trying to steady his breath. "It worked before. I swear, it just needs calibration." Maddox pressed the buzzer. The harsh sound cut through the air like a blade. "Thank you, Mr. Dalton. That will be all." The crowd's laughter returned, louder now, echoing through the rafters. Frank's mouth quivered. He tried to speak again, but the microphone had already been muted. He stood in silence, clutching the broken drone like it was something sacred. Frank turned slowly toward the audience. The lights seemed brighter now, almost cruel in their intensity. He forced a faint smile, trying to salvage what dignity he could. "Thank you for your time," he said softly, his voice barely reaching the microphone. But no one clapped. A few people exchanged awkward glances. Somewhere in the back, someone muttered, "Poor guy." Frank gave a small salute out of old habit, sharp, practiced, and heartbreakingly misplaced in this glittering studio. Then, he bent down, placed the damaged drone back into its case, and straightened up with the weary precision of a soldier carrying invisible weight. The audience didn't know what to do. Should they laugh, applaud, or just look away? The silence was heavy. Even the host shifted uncomfortably, realizing this wasn't the feel-good moment the show wanted. At the edge of the stage, the lead judge leaned toward his microphone again. "Sir," he said flatly, "this is entertainment, not science fiction." The words hit like a slap. The audience gasped, half in shock, half in agreement. The red light above the camera blinked again, marking the live feed. Millions of viewers saw Frank Dalton stop mid-step, shoulders tightening. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then, without turning around, he simply said, "Understood." The doors closed behind him. With a hollow echo, the studio remained silent, the air electric with discomfort. From the far end of the judge's table, Keanu Reeves watched it all. He hadn't spoken once during the demonstration, but now his jaw tightened. His expression wasn't anger, it was disappointment. The kind that carried weight. The kind that made people shift in their seats without knowing why. The host cleared his throat, forcing a grin. "Well, folks, innovation can be tricky. Let's move on to our next contestant." But no one clapped right away. The energy had changed. The laughter felt wrong now. Keanu leaned slightly toward the head judge and said quietly, almost to himself, "That wasn't right." The camera caught the moment, a look of conviction in his eyes. A flicker of something that hinted the story was far from over. Keanu remained seated as the next contestant prepared backstage, but his focus lingered on the empty spot where Frank Dalton had stood moments earlier. The old man's quiet salute kept replaying in his mind, a gesture that didn't belong to the world of flashing lights and applause. It came from a place of respect and sacrifice, something the show had just mocked without realizing it. The judges tried to shake off the tension. Evan leaned back in his chair, spinning his pen. "You can't get sentimental on these shows," he said under his breath. "They sign up knowing the risks. It's all part of the drama." Keanu didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed on the stage door where Frank had disappeared. The echo of that buzzer still rang in his ears. He knew television thrived on moments like this: embarrassment, spectacle, the audience's need for a laugh. But this had felt wrong. Not just unfair, cruel. In the audience, a woman whispered to her son. He was brave to even try. The boy nodded, frowning. He looked sad. Their small exchange was swallowed by the sound of upbeat theme music. As the next segment began, the host's voice rose again, polished and cheerful. "Our next contestant brings us a tech breakthrough that could revolutionize transportation." Cameras panned across smiling faces, but a strange energy hung over the crowd. They weren't quite ready to cheer again. Behind the scenes, a camera operator walked past Keanu and muttered, "Guy risked his life for this country, and that's how they treat him?" The man shook his head and went back to his post. Keanu folded his hands together. He wasn't angry. He was thoughtful, the way he always got before he decided to act. The lead judge noticed and tried to break the tension. "Look, Reeves, it's just show business. You can't save everyone." Keanu finally turned toward him, voice quiet but firm. "You're right. I can't save everyone. but I can speak when something's wrong." The judge smirked, dismissive, but something in Keanu's tone made him uneasy. The audience clapped mechanically for the new contestant, unaware that the moment of real importance had already happened. Backstage, the bright applause and studio lights faded into a dim corridor, lined with cables, folding chairs, and half-empty coffee cups. The noise from the next segment echoed faintly through the walls, but here everything felt still, heavy, and awkward. Frank Dalton walked slowly, his cane tapping softly on the concrete floor. Each step carried the weight of humiliation. He passed a few crew members standing by the sound equipment. They glanced at him, then quickly looked away, pretending to check their phones or adjust cables. No one wanted to meet his eyes. One of the younger assistants whispered to another, "Poor guy. They shouldn't have treated him like that." The other just sighed. "Yeah, but it's TV. They want the drama." Frank didn't stop. His old duffel bag sat on a nearby bench, the same one he'd carried through airports, bus stations, and now a television studio that had laughed him off stage. He unzipped it slowly and began placing the broken pieces of his drone inside. Each rotor, each wire, each fragment carried months of late nights and trembling hands. He wiped his eyes once, quickly, making sure no one saw. But Keanu Reeves did. He had followed quietly from the judges' panel, unnoticed by cameras or crew. He stood at a distance for a moment, watching the veterans' slow, deliberate movements. There was something in Frank's posture pride fighting exhaustion that reminded Keanu of the quiet strength he'd seen in people who had nothing left to prove. Frank tried to close the duffel bag, but the zipper snagged. His fingers fumbled. "Guess they were right," he muttered under his breath. "Maybe I've run out of time." His voice was barely audible. Keanu took a step forward. "You haven't," he said softly. Frank turned, startled. He hadn't realized anyone was there. When he saw who it was, he straightened instinctively. "Mr. Reeves," he said, nodding respectfully. "Didn't mean to hold things up backstage." "You're not holding anything up," Keanu replied. He crouched beside the bench, eye level with him. "You served this country. You don't owe anyone an apology for trying." Frank smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. Trying doesn't mean much when people stop believing in you. He looked down at his hands, stained with oil and age. "Used to be someone once. Now I'm just the old man who embarrassed himself on TV." Keanu studied him quietly. The man wasn't bitter. He was defeated. And that, somehow, was worse. "You're wrong about that," Keanu said finally. "You still have something to give. Maybe they didn't see it, but I did." Frank looked up slowly, disbelief flickering across his face. "Why would you care?" Keanu's answer was simple, steady, and sincere. "Because people stopped believing in me once too. Someone gave me a chance when the world laughed. I don't forget that." For the first time, Frank's eyes softened. There was no audience, no cameras. Just two men in a quiet hallway, both understanding what it felt like to be written off too soon. Keanu stayed in the hallway with Frank, away from the laughter and chatter of production staff returning to their routines. The contrast between the lively studio and the quiet backstage was painful. A moment ago, Frank had been under spotlights. Now, he was in shadows no one cared to look into. He set the duffel on a crate and took a long breath, as though trying to steady a storm inside. "You don't have to waste your time with me," he said, keeping his eyes on the floor. "I've had my shot." His tone was neither angry nor bitter, just tired, the sound of a man worn down by years of disappointment. Keanu pulled a chair closer and sat beside him. "You had more than a shot," he said quietly. "You had courage. That's something most people in there don't even understand." Frank gave a small, dry laugh. "Courage doesn't keep the lights on, doesn't fix what's broken." He rubbed his hands together, feeling the grime that never seemed to wash away. "I thought if I could get this right, maybe I'd matter again." Maybe someone would listen. You think they didn't listen? Keanu asked gently. They laughed, Frank said. That's worse. His voice cracked on the word. I've been laughed at before. After the war, after my divorce, after the VA told me they didn't have space for my project, I guess I should be used to it. Keanu's gaze softened. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You said you served in the army, right? Frank nodded. 24 years. Combat engineer. Built bridges in places most people wouldn't dare step foot in. Lost good men, too. He swallowed hard. I guess when I retired, I still wanted to build something that saved people instead of losing them. For a while, neither of them spoke. The hum of stage lights and muffled laughter from the next contestant drifted faintly down the corridor. Keanu glanced toward the studio doors, then back at Frank. You built something that came from your heart. That matters. Whether or not it worked tonight doesn't change that. Frank sighed. You sound like one of those inspirational speakers. Keanu smiled a little. I'm not. I just don't like seeing good people forgotten. Frank's eyes glistened as he looked down at the drone's cracked rotor, peeking from the duffel. You really think there's still something left for me to give? I don't think it, Keanu said. I know it. For the first time that night, Frank's shoulders lifted slightly, as if some invisible burden had eased. He didn't thank Keanu. Not yet. But something in his silence said enough. Frank sat still for a long time, staring at the cracked floor beneath his boots. The overhead lights buzzed faintly. His fingers traced the zipper of the duffel as if searching for something to hold on to. You know, he finally said, when I came here, I wasn't expecting to win. I just wanted someone to see what I made and tell me it wasn't crazy, that it meant something. Keanu leaned back, his voice calm. It does mean something. You built it to save lives. That's not crazy, that's purpose. Frank shook his head. Purpose doesn't mean much when no one listens. His tone was soft, almost apologetic. You get to a point in life where the world moves too fast for you. Your hands shake, your ideas sound outdated, and suddenly people treat you like a relic. He paused, his voice trembling now. All I wanted was to matter one more time before I'm gone. Keanu didn't interrupt. He understood the silence between the words. He'd seen it before in veterans, in homeless shelters, in people who once led and now simply tried to survive. After a while, he said quietly, Frank, people forget that greatness doesn't retire. It just waits for someone to notice again. Frank looked up, studying Keanu's face. There was no pity there, only understanding. You really believe that? Keanu nodded slowly. I do. And I believe you still have work left to do. A tear escaped down Frank's cheek before he could stop it. He wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. Sorry, he muttered. Didn't mean to get emotional. Keanu gave a faint smile. Emotions don't make you weak, Frank. They make you human. The older man chuckled, shaking his head. You talk like someone who's seen a lot. I have, Keanu said. And I've learned that the world doesn't change because of fame or wealth. It changes because one person refuses to walk away when it's easier to stay silent. Frank exhaled slowly, letting the words sink in. For a moment, the tension in his shoulders softened. You really think I could fix it? That thing out there? Keanu's reply came without hesitation. With the right help, yes. And I'll make sure you get it. Frank blinked, confused. You mean, I'll stand with you, Keanu said simply. You deserve to finish what you started. Frank's lips parted, but no words came. His eyes shimmered again. This time, not from shame, but from something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He reached out a shaky hand. Keanu took it firmly, his grip steady, grounding. The two men sat there, hand in hand, surrounded by humming wires and forgotten props, sharing a silence that carried more meaning than applause ever could. After a moment, Frank's voice came out in a whisper.
"No one believes in people like me anymore."
Keanu met his eyes and said softly, "I do." The words hung in the air like a promise. Somewhere beyond the hallway, the studio crowd cheered for another contestant, but neither man looked up. Something far more important had begun not on stage, but here, in the quiet where belief was being rebuilt, one word at a time. The next segment of The Greatest Inventor was halfway through when Keanu returned to the judging table. The lights blazed again, and the crowd's laughter had recovered from the awkwardness earlier. Contestants came and went with flashy presentations, all polish and performance. But Keanu's mind wasn't on them. He couldn't stop thinking about the old man backstage, sitting alone with a broken machine and years of forgotten service. As the cameras panned across the judges, Keanu sat motionless, hands folded. The host cracked a joke, and the audience roared. But Keanu didn't even smile. His silence stood out. When the next commercial break arrived, crew members swarmed the stage, adjusting props and microphones. The judges leaned back, chatting idly. But Keanu stayed quiet until the floor director called out, "60 seconds till we're live again." That was when Keanu stood. The movement caught everyone off guard. The producer in the control booth spoke urgently into his headset. What's he doing? We're on in less than a minute." Keanu turned to the nearest camera operator. "Can you keep that rolling?" he asked calmly. The man hesitated. "We're off air, sir." "Doesn't matter," Keanu said. "This needs to be seen." Down below, the show's executive producer waved his hands. "Keanu, please, if you want to address something, we can do it privately." But Keanu shook his head. "No, it has to be now." His tone was quiet, but carried a finality that left no room for argument. The host, startled, approached cautiously. "Keanu, what's going on?" Keanu faced the audience, his expression composed but intense. "I want to make a statement before we move on." A hush fell over the studio. The producer's voice crackled over the intercom. "Get cameras rolling again. Don't cut." Keanu took a step forward, toward the front of the stage. The bright lights reflected off the polished floor as he looked over the faces before him, some curious, some uneasy, some just waiting for drama. Then he spoke. "Earlier tonight," he began, his voice steady but resonant, "a man stood on this stage and presented something extraordinary. He was dismissed before he had the chance to be heard. That man is Frank Dalton, a veteran who spent 24 years serving this country." The audience murmured. Some remembered. Others looked confused. Keanu continued, his words deliberate and piercing. "He came here not for fame, not for money, but to share an idea that could save lives. And instead of respect, he was met with laughter." The room fell completely silent. The judges shifted uncomfortably. One of them whispered, "Is he really doing this live?" Keanu turned slightly toward them, but didn't raise his voice. "If we can't believe in the dream of a man who risked his life for this country, who else will?" A gasp rippled through the audience. Someone in the back clapped once, hesitant, then stopped. Keanu's tone softened. "We talk about innovation like it's only for the young, the wealthy, or the famous. But the truth is, invention doesn't come from privilege. It comes from courage." "And courage," he said, glancing toward the stage door where Frank had exited, "is something Mr. Dalton has in abundance." The studio was frozen. Every camera turned toward him, and the control booth went silent. The only sound was Keanu's measured breathing and the faint hum of studio equipment. The host stood near the edge of the stage, unsure whether to intervene. This wasn't in the script. The teleprompter went blank, waiting for direction that never came. Keanu stepped forward again, his voice lower now but filled with conviction. "When I was asked to be a guest on this show, I thought I was here to celebrate innovation. But innovation doesn't just happen in laboratories or studios. Sometimes it's built in a garage by a man who refuses to give up, even when the world stops listening. His words echoed through the hushed auditorium. Even the stage crew had stopped moving. The audience, sensing something genuine and unscripted, began to lean in. Keanu looked at the judges, his expression calm but unyielding. "You're all experts," he said. "You know the science, the design, the data. But sometimes the best ideas come from heart, not hardware. That man back there deserves the same respect as anyone who's ever stood here." The lead judge, Dr. Maddox, shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Reeves, I understand your sentiment, but this is a competition. Rules exist for a reason." Keanu nodded. "Yes, they do. But fairness exists for a reason too." He paused, scanning the faces of the crowd. Frank Dalton stood on this stage, representing every person who's ever been told they're too old, too late, too small to matter. And I think this show owes him the chance to finish what he started. The audience broke into scattered applause. A few people rose from their seats. The cameras caught their faces. Mothers, veterans, young students, all reacting to something real, not staged. The producer spoke into his headset again. "Keep filming. This is gold," he whispered. Dr. Maddox frowned. "Keanu, this isn't how television works." Keanu's response came softly. "Then maybe television should change." The words hit harder than anyone expected. Even the host stood silent, his usual showman smile gone. A few seconds passed. Then a woman in the third row began clapping. Slowly, others joined in. The sound grew until the studio filled with applause, not for spectacle, but for truth. Keanu waited, eyes on the crowd, until the noise swelled and the momentum was unstoppable. When it quieted again, he said, "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for basic decency. Let him finish his idea. Not for ratings, not for me. For what's right." The producer looked to the director, who shrugged helplessly. The live broadcast timer flashed red, demanding a decision. The control booth erupted in overlapping voices, some arguing to cut to commercial, others saying to let it play out. Finally, the host raised his mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice trembling just slightly, "it seems we've got something special happening tonight." He turned toward Keanu. "You're saying you want to bring him back? Right now?" Keanu nodded once. "Right now?" The crowd erupted into cheers. The decision was made before anyone in production could stop it. The energy had shifted completely. "Then let's do it," the host said, turning toward the audience with a renewed spark. "Frank Dalton will return for a special reevaluation." The applause exploded into a standing ovation. Behind the curtain, Frank looked up from his duffel bag, confusion crossing his face as he heard his name echo through the speakers. Frank froze in place, his hand still resting on the strap of his duffel bag. He thought he'd misheard at first. The muffled roar of applause from the stage didn't make sense. He was sure they'd moved on to the next contestant. Then he heard it again, loud and clear. "Frank Dalton will return for a special reevaluation." For a moment, he just stood there, stunned. One of the crew members nearby looked at him with wide eyes. "That's you, sir. They're calling you back." Frank blinked. "They're what?" His voice cracked in disbelief. "Go," the young woman said, urging him forward. "You've got to go back out there." He hesitated, gripping his cane tighter. I don't understand." Then, down the hallway, Keanu appeared. His stride was calm, purposeful, his black jacket catching the glow of the studio lights. When their eyes met, Frank saw something in Keanu's face he hadn't seen from anyone in years. Belief. Not pity, not sympathy, but belief. Keanu stopped in front of him. "They're giving you another chance," he said. "The audience wants to hear you out." Frank shook his head slowly. "You did this?" Keanu smiled faintly. "No, Frank, you did this." You just needed someone to remind them who you are. Frank's throat tightened. What if it fails again? Then, it fails, Keanu said. But this time, you'll walk off that stage with your head high, knowing they heard you. That's all that matters. Frank swallowed hard and nodded. All right. The stage manager gestured toward the curtain. We're live in 10 seconds, he whispered. Frank took a deep breath. The drone inside his bag rattled softly as he lifted it. The studio noise swelled as the host's voice rose. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Mr. Frank Dalton! The curtain opened. Frank stepped forward into the blinding light again. The crowd rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. It wasn't mockery this time, it was respect. He blinked against the brightness, his heart pounding. Somewhere near the front, Keanu stood with his arms crossed, giving a small nod of encouragement. Frank reached the microphone. For a second, he couldn't speak. The silence stretched, but this time it felt expectant, not cruel. I don't know what to say, he began, his voice shaking. I guess, thank you for letting me try again. The applause swelled again, softer now, like support instead of spectacle. Behind the cameras, Keanu gave a small, approving smile. The host motioned for the crew to cut to a close-up of Frank's face, capturing the quiet strength returning to him. This time, the stage didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a beginning. And somewhere deep in his chest, Frank Dalton felt something he hadn't in a long, long time: hope. The show ended hours later, but the memory of that moment stayed with everyone who had witnessed it. The audience had long gone home. The cameras shut off. The stage lights dimmed to a ghostly blue. Outside, the rain came down in steady sheets, pooling across the pavement and reflecting the glow of the studio's neon sign. Frank Dalton stood near the curb, his worn duffel bag clutched close, the same one that had carried his broken invention through airports and bus rides. His jacket, once olive green, now looked almost black in the rain. Each drop soaked into the fabric, but he didn't seem to care. He stared at the ground, his mind distant, replaying the events of the night, the humiliation, the disbelief, the applause, and that moment when Keanu Reeves had spoken up for him. He didn't know what to make of it. No one had ever stood up for him like that. Not in years. The studio door swung open behind him. Keanu stepped out, an umbrella in hand, dressed in a black coat that glistened in the rain. His stride was unhurried, the kind that didn't demand attention, but commanded it naturally. When he reached Frank, he held out the umbrella without a word. Frank looked up, startled. You again? Keanu smiled faintly. Couldn't let you walk out in this weather. Frank gave a small laugh. I've been through worse. I don't doubt that, Keanu said. He adjusted the umbrella so it covered them both. You heading home? Frank nodded slowly. Bus stop's down the street. It's a long ride to Glendale, but I'll manage. Keanu looked at him for a moment, as if weighing something. Then he said, I've got a few friends who build machines that save lives. I think they'd love to meet you. Frank's eyebrows rose. You mean real engineers? Yeah, Keanu said. The kind who don't laugh at new ideas. Frank gave a weak chuckle. That's kind of you, but I can't pay engineers. My retirement barely covers rent. Keanu's expression softened. You won't have to. Frank studied him carefully. You're serious, aren't you? I wouldn't be standing in the rain if I wasn't. One, Keanu said simply. Frank opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught. He had spent years being dismissed, told he was too old, too naive, too poor to matter. Now someone believed in him, and not just anyone, Keanu Reeves. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was sacred. Finally, Frank nodded. All right, if they'll listen, I'll talk. Keanu smiled again. Good, I'll make the calls tonight. Frank looked up at the rain. a faint smile tugging at his lips. You know, I used to think my best days were behind me. Keanu shook his head. Maybe they're just getting started. They stood there for a moment longer, the rain falling around them, the quiet hum of traffic in the distance. Then Keanu reached into his pocket and handed Frank a small card. This is my assistant's number. Call her tomorrow morning. She'll arrange everything. Frank hesitated before taking it. You're really doing this? Keanu nodded. Let's build something that matters. Frank looked at the card again, then tucked it carefully into his jacket. For the first time in years, the cold didn't bother him. Frank sat on the edge of his bed that night, the worn card still between his fingers. The faint blue light of the television flickered against the walls of his small apartment, where every object told a story. Old medals on a shelf, photos of his platoon, a folded flag in a glass case. The drone pieces lay disassembled on his kitchen table, half wrapped in a towel. He kept looking between them and the card, as if trying to decide whether the offer had been real. He replayed every word from earlier. Keanu's calm tone, the certainty in his voice. No cameras, no performance. Just a man who meant what he said. Frank wanted to believe, but a lifetime of disappointment made him cautious. He placed the card gently on the table, next to the drone. Don't get your hopes up, he murmured to himself. People say things in the heat of the word moment. But while Frank slept uneasily, Keanu was wide awake across town. His apartment lights glowed faintly against the dark Los Angeles skyline. He sat at his desk, typing messages to contacts in his phone, people he'd worked with on stunt projects, custom bike builds, and humanitarian efforts. Each message was short and direct. Need help with a prototype for a rescue drone. Veteran-built concept. Can we talk? He sent one to Luis Ortega, a retired Army mechanic now teaching at a vocational school. Another to Maya Chen, an aerospace graduate student who had helped design lightweight stabilizers for drone cameras. And one more to Sanjay Patel, a robotics professor who had quietly built prosthetics for wounded veterans. Within an hour, replies began lighting up his screen. Count me in. What's the story? Send me specs. I'm curious. Keanu leaned back, a rare smile forming on his face. The idea was already in motion. He didn't tell anyone it was mad, coming out of his own pocket. He never did. Money wasn't the point, belief was. By midnight, he had arranged a meeting for later that week in an unused hangar in Burbank that he'd once rented for stunt rehearsals. He imagined Frank walking in there, meeting a group of strangers ready to treat him like an equal, not a relic. That image kept him awake for hours. The next morning, Frank woke to the sound of rain still pattering against his window. He made coffee, sat at the table, and stared again at the card. Finally, he picked up the phone and dialed the number. A warm voice answered. Good morning. This is Anne. Mr. Reeves's office. Frank hesitated. This is Frank Dalton, Keanu said to call. Yes, Mr. Dalton. We've been expecting you, she said kindly. Can you meet at the address? I'll text you tomorrow afternoon. Frank blinked, taken aback. You're serious? She laughed softly. Mr. Reeves doesn't joke about this kind of thing. Frank ended the call slowly, staring at his trembling hand. It felt like the world had shifted overnight, like someone had quietly reopened a door he thought was locked forever. He turned to the small drone parts on his table and whispered, Looks like we're not done yet, old friend. The next afternoon, the rain had stopped, leaving Los Angeles washed clean and glistening. The sky was a pale blue when Frank stepped out of the bus at the address Keanu's assistant had sent. Before him stood a wide metal hangar surrounded by scrub grass and chain-link fencing. A faded sign read Ryder Air Logistics Leased Facility. He tightened his grip on his duffel bag and took a slow breath. He half expected it to be some kind of misunderstanding. But when he pushed the door open, the smell of oil and metal greeted him. Inside, under bright work lights, several people stood beside tables covered with tools, laptops, and prototype parts. Keanu was there, talking with a group near the back. When he saw Frank, he waved. "You made it." Frank looked around, overwhelmed. "What is this place?" Keanu gestured to the others. "This is the start of something. Everyone, this is Frank Dalton. He's the man with the idea." 3 people stepped forward. A tall, broad-shouldered man with gray stubble extended his hand. "Luis Ortega, Army mechanic. Heard your story. Glad to meet you." Beside him stood Maya Chen, a young woman with dark hair tied in a bun, wearing a grease-smeared hoodie. "Aerospace grad student," she said. "I'm here because Keanu said your drone could change the game. I want to see if that's true." And last was Sanjay Patel, small, bespectacled, holding a tablet. "Professor of robotics at Caltech," he said warmly. "Keanu told me your idea has potential. Let's find out together." Frank blinked, speechless. "You're all here for me?" Keanu nodded. "You earned this, Frank. Let's see what your invention can really do." Frank's throat tightened. For years, he'd been dismissed. Now, 3 professionals stood ready to work beside him. He swallowed hard. "I don't even know what to say." "Say we get started," Luis said with a grin. They gathered around a table as Frank unzipped his duffel and revealed the damaged drone. The parts clattered onto the surface. "This is all I've got," he said apologetically. "It's not pretty." Maya leaned in, eyes wide. "It's brilliant," she murmured. "The thrust design's unconventional, but it could work with stabilizers." Sanjay nodded thoughtfully. "With a dual magnetic balance system, yes, we could adapt that." Frank looked up, startled. For once, no one was laughing. They were analyzing, planning, believing. Keanu crossed his arms, smiling faintly. "See, Frank? You weren't crazy. You were just early." Frank laughed quietly, the sound raw but genuine. "Guess it's about time someone told me that." That night, as they worked into the early hours, the hangar came alive with the hum of tools and quiet conversation. Sparks flickered as Luis welded support struts. Maya typed equations on her laptop. Sanjay adjusted rotors. Keanu watched from a distance, hands in his pockets, quietly funding every piece, every hour, every dream. Frank didn't know it yet, but his idea was finally taking flight. The morning sun crept through the high windows of the hangar, scattering lines of gold across the concrete floor. Dust floated in the beams of light like slow-moving sparks. Frank stood at the center of it all, surrounded by tables piled with tools, wires, batteries, and sketches. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose strong enough to quiet the ache in his bones. Keanu arrived with coffee for everyone, setting the cups down beside a tangle of circuit boards. Maya was already hunched over her laptop, hair pulled back, tapping out calculations for the drone's lift ratio. Luis whistled softly as he tested a motor coil on a voltmeter. Sanjay examined Frank's original blueprint spread across the table, nodding with quiet respect. "This is remarkable," Sanjay said, adjusting his glasses. "The concept's crude, but the theory isn't wrong." Frank smiled awkwardly. "I drew it with a carpenter's pencil on my kitchen counter. Didn't have drafting software." "That's all right," Maya said without looking up. "Great things start on napkins." Keanu sipped his coffee, studying the scene. "Frank, walk us through it again," he said. Frank shuffled to the whiteboard they'd propped up against a stack of crates. His hand trembled slightly as he drew rough circles and arrows. "The core idea's simple," he explained. 2 motors here for lift, 1 central stabilizer that adjusts for balance. The key's in the counterweight it shifts based on the drone's tilt, like a self-correcting pendulum. Luis leaned over, frowning with interest. "That could actually work. You're using gravity as your co-pilot." Frank nodded, encouraged. "Exactly. I wanted it to function even if power fluctuated during rescue missions. That way, it could hover just long enough to save someone before crashing." The room fell quiet for a moment. They all understood the weight behind his words. Frank wasn't designing a toy or a quaz. Tech showpiece, he was designing something to save lives. Keanu broke the silence. "All right," he said, clapping his hands once. "Let's make it real." Luis cut metal parts from spare frames. Maya printed new stabilizers with a 3D printer, and Sanjay coded a simple flight algorithm. Frank moved from table to table, offering ideas, asking questions, sketching improvements. Every so often, he paused, his breath catching as he watched the others bring his dream to life, piece by piece. By late afternoon, the first prototype stood, assembled a patchwork of aluminum, carbon fiber, and hope. It was rough and uneven, but to Frank, it looked beautiful. He ran his hand along its frame. "It's lighter than mine," he said softly. Maya smiled. "That's because we actually know what carbon fiber is." Everyone laughed, including Frank. For a moment, the room felt light, filled with the kind of joy that comes from purpose shared. "Let's see if it can fly," Sanjay said. They cleared a space in the hangar and placed the drone in the center. Frank knelt beside it, holding the remote like it was something sacred. The others watched in silence as he flipped the switch. The drone hummed, its rotors spinning faster and faster. For an instant, it lifted an inch off the ground. Then a loud pop echoed, and one motor sparked out. The machine tilted, crashed, and went still. Frank's shoulders sank. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I must have done something wrong." Luis knelt beside the fallen drone and began unplugging the burned motor. "Not your fault, old man," he said. "We pushed it too soon." Frank looked down, shame crossing his face. "It always fails at this point. Maybe the balance system's flawed." "It's not flawed," Maya said firmly, crouching beside him. "It just needs tuning. You were right about the counterweight, but the algorithm's too slow to adjust." Sanjay nodded. "We'll rewrite the control script. It's simple, just takes patience." Keanu stepped closer, folding his arms. His tone was steady. "Failure is just the first step toward flight." Everyone paused. The words carried a quiet authority that filled the room. Frank glanced up at him. "You really believe that?" "I've lived it," Keanu replied. "Every film, every role. Every time someone told me I couldn't do something, I failed first. Then I learned." Luis grinned. "Well, guess we're learning fast." The tension broke, replaced by laughter. Even Frank smiled. He picked up a screwdriver and said, "All right then, let's fix what we broke." They got back to work. The hangar came alive again with movement and purpose. Sparks flew as Luis resoldered the motor leads. Maya adjusted the stabilizer angles on her laptop, while Sanjay coded a new feedback loop. Frank hovered near them, his cane leaning against the table. "I never thought I'd see something like this," he said softly. "People working on my idea." Maya looked up from the laptop. "You gave us something worth building." For the next few hours, the drone began to take shape again. Stronger, more stable. Keanu moved quietly through the room, fetching tools, tightening bolts, sometimes just watching. He wasn't there to command. He was there to encourage. By sunset, the light slanted through the hangar doors, painting the floor gold. The rebuilt drone rested in the center of the room, sleeker now, its frame reinforced. The air buzzed with anticipation. "Moment of truth," Luis said, rubbing his hands. Frank hesitated, holding the remote. His fingers trembled. Keanu placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You've got this." Frank pressed the button. The drone rose again, slowly, this time 6 inches, then a foot. It wobbled, but held. The sound filled the hangar, soft and steady, like a heartbeat. Maya laughed out loud. "It's flying!" Frank stared, eyes wide. "It's really flying." The drone hovered for several seconds before Luis guided it down gently. When it touched the ground, the room erupted in cheers. Frank wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I don't know what to say." Keanu smiled. "Don't say anything yet. We're just getting started." The lights flickered on as night settled outside. Tools clinked, papers rustled, and the hum of new beginnings filled the space. The team worked late into the evening, driven by shared belief and a single goal to make the impossible possible. By the time they shut down the lights, no one felt tired. The hangar glowed faintly under the moonlight, alive, with renewed hope. ChatGPT denoy. The next morning, the hangar doors creaked open to the smell of coffee and machine oil. The team drifted in one by one, bleary-eyed but smiling. Frank arrived last, his duffel slung over his shoulder. The sight before him made him stop in his tracks. His drone, no. Their drone was already on the workbench, half disassembled again, surrounded by sketches, notes, and circuit boards. Maya waved from across the room. "Morning, soldier. We couldn't wait for you." Frank laughed quietly. "I see that." He walked over, running a hand along the drone's smooth carbon frame. "She looks different already." Luis tightened a bolt. That's what happens when you give engineers a reason to believe in something. Frank sat down, opening his notebook. His handwriting was rough but steady. "I was thinking about weight distribution last night. If we adjust the power to each motor based on the payload, it might stay level longer." Sanjay looked up from his tablet. "That's actually brilliant. A variable balance function. I can code that." Keanu stood in the corner, sipping from a paper cup, quietly observing the teamwork forming before him. He didn't interrupt or direct. He just smiled, proud of what was happening without needing credit. Hours passed quickly. Ideas flowed. Mistakes became lessons, and lessons became progress. Frank's confidence returned piece by piece, like fragments of himself being reassembled alongside the drone. By late afternoon, the team gathered again for another test. The drone's surface gleamed under the light, its stabilizers newly adjusted. Frank held the remote, his hand steadier this time. "All right," Maya said, holding her breath. Moment of truth, round 2. Frank pressed the button. The motors spun. The drone lifted, rising smoothly, leveling out as it hovered 3 feet above the floor. The balance held steady. Luis whooped and clapped his hands. "It's stable!" he shouted. Sanjay grinned. "Completely balanced! We did it!" Frank lowered the drone gently, then turned toward Keanu. His voice cracked as he said, "You were right. Failure was the first step." Keanu nodded. "And this," he said softly, "is the second, believing it can work." The team shared a long, quiet moment, the kind that marked the start of something extraordinary. The nights in the hangar were long now. The buzz of machinery had faded to quiet humming, and the glow from the overhead lights gave the space a soft amber tone. Everyone had gone home for the night, except Frank. He sat at the workbench, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the half-assembled drone in front of him. It looked almost finished, sleek, balanced, and powerful. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. His mind kept drifting back to faces he hadn't seen in years. The hangar around him blurred, replaced by the roaring sandstorms of Afghanistan and the choking scent of smoke and dust. He saw 2 young men, his unit partners, both gone now, laughing as they packed gear into a truck. "Dalton, you're getting soft," one had teased, slapping him on the back. Minutes later, the roadside explosion had buried them under rubble. Frank had tried to dig them out, with his bare hands, shouting their names until his throat bled. He never forgot that sound, the silence that followed when it was too late. The hum of the fluorescent light brought him back to the present. His hand tightened around a wrench until his knuckles turned white. He didn't hear Maya walk in at first. She'd returned after realizing she left her notebook behind. When she saw him sitting there, shoulders hunched in the glow, she stopped near the doorway. "You should get some sleep," she said gently. Frank didn't look up. "Can't." he muttered. Maya stepped closer, her voice soft. "We've been at this for weeks. You'll burn out if you keep pushing like this." He turned slowly toward her, eyes tired but sharp. "You ever lose someone and know it was your fault?" The question caught her off guard. She hesitated before answering. "I've lost people," she said quietly. "But I don't think I'll ever know that kind of guilt." Frank looked back at the drone, his voice barely above a whisper. "In Afghanistan, I lost 2 men under rubble. They were kids, both of them. I swore if I ever got the chance, I'd build something that could have saved them. Something that could lift what I couldn't." Maya's breath caught. She stepped closer until she was standing beside him. "Frank," she said softly, "you're not trying to fix a machine. You're trying to fix a wound that never healed." He didn't answer, just nodded faintly, his jaw tightening as his eyes glistened. Maya placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Then let's finish what they started," she said. "For them. For you." Frank looked up at her, gratitude flickering in his weary eyes. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone in carrying that memory. Frank leaned back in his chair, staring at the half-built drone as if it were alive. The faint light from a single hanging bulb illuminated its metallic frame, casting long shadows across the hangar floor. "You really think something like this can make a difference?" he asked quietly. Maya pulled up a chair beside him. "I think it already has," she said. "It brought us here, didn't it? You, me, Luis, Sanjay, and Keanu. People who never would have met otherwise." Frank smiled faintly. "That's one way to look at it." Maya leaned forward, her tone thoughtful. "But you're asking the wrong question. It's not whether this machine can change the world, it's whether you're willing to let it change you." He let out a small laugh. "You sound like Reeves now." "I've been listening to him a lot lately," she admitted. "He has a way of making people think they're braver than they feel." Frank sighed. "He does that, doesn't he?" He looked down at the blueprints scattered across the table. His hands, worn and scarred, rested on top of them. "I've spent my whole life trying to build something that lasts. Bridges, shelters, even this drone. But maybe I just wanted to prove I could still do something that mattered." "You have," Maya said firmly. "Look around you. This place, these people, they believe because of you. That doesn't happen by accident." Frank nodded slowly. "I guess I never expected anyone to believe again. Not after all this time." "Then maybe it's time to start," Maya said. The silence that followed was peaceful this time, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Maya stood up and began shutting off the lights one by one. Frank stayed seated, lost in thought, his heart lighter than it had been in years. At that same moment, in a small office corner across the hangar, Keanu was recording a short video on his phone. The team didn't know it yet, but he'd been quietly documenting their journey. Moments of laughter, failure, and perseverance. He looked into the camera, his expression calm and sincere. "Sometimes heroes come back to serve again," he said. "Not on the battlefield, but in the way they rebuild, the way they inspire others to keep going." He paused for a moment, then added, "You don't have to wear a uniform to save lives. Sometimes belief is enough." He ended the recording and uploaded it with a simple caption, "For Frank Dalton and everyone who still believes." By morning, the clip had spread quietly across veteran communities online. Comments began pouring in. "Reminds me of my old CO. We're still out here building, brother. Thank you for not letting the world forget us." Frank had no idea. He was still asleep at his workbench, dreaming of the desert, this time without the sound of explosions. Only wind and the faint hum of a drone lifting into the sky. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the hangar floor, cutting through the lingering chill. Frank stirred awake at the workbench, his coat draped over his shoulders, the faint ache of old injuries reminding him of the night before. When he lifted his head, Maya was already there, coffee in hand. "Rough night?" she asked gently. He rubbed his eyes and smiled faintly. "Didn't mean to fall asleep here." "Good thing you did," Maya said, setting the cup in front of him. "You missed your online debut." Frank frowned. "My what?" She turned her laptop toward him. On the screen, a video played a short clip of Keanu speaking, his calm voice steady against a montage of the team working together, Frank sketching on the whiteboard, and the drone slowly taking shape. The caption read, "Sometimes heroes come back to serve again in different ways." The view count was already climbing. Thousands of comments scrolled beneath it. Messages from veterans, engineers, and ordinary people filled the feed. Frank blinked hard, his throat tightening. "He put this online?" Maya nodded. "It's everywhere now. You should see the responses. Veterans are saying your story gave them hope. Some want to volunteer to help. Others are sharing their own inventions, their own unfinished dreams." Frank stared at the screen, speechless. He had spent years in silence, convinced the world had moved on without him. Now, strangers were calling him a hero again. The word felt strange, almost undeserved, but it lit something deep inside him, a small spark that refused to die. The hangar door creaked open, and Keanu walked in with Luis and Sanjay close behind. He looked around at the setup and smiled. "Looks like we went viral," he said casually. Frank stood, still dazed. "You did this?" Keanu shook his head. "No, you did. I just pressed upload." Frank swallowed hard. "I don't deserve that kind of attention." "You deserve to be heard," Keanu said quietly. "And maybe the people watching needed to hear you." Luis grinned. "You should have seen the comments from vets, man. You started something." Frank looked back at the drone. "Then we'd better make sure it's worth it." The group exchanged smiles and went back to work. The energy was different now, fueled by something larger than invention. They weren't just fixing a machine anymore, they were building a symbol of second chances. As Frank tightened a final bolt, he felt the weight of his memories shift. For the first time since the war, they didn't crush him, they guided him. When he looked up, the others were watching quietly, waiting for his cue. He took a deep breath. "All right," he said, voice steady and sure. "Let's finish what we started." Outside, the California sun climbed higher, flooding the hangar in golden light. Inside, hope took form in steel and circuitry, rising inch by inch toward flight. Weeks passed, each day blending into the next. The hangar became a second home, coffee cups stacked on toolboxes, half-eaten sandwiches beside soldering kits, and whiteboards covered in formulas and rough sketches. Despite countless late nights, the air in the workshop never felt heavy. It was charged with something bigger than ambition. It was purpose. Still, progress was slow. Every time the team thought they had perfected the drone, something failed. A motor burned out. A stabilizer buckled. A code glitch sent it crashing into the floor. Frank took every failure personally, though the others reminded him that innovation was never a straight line. One evening, after another test ended in smoke, Frank sat down on a crate and stared at the twisted propeller blades. "Maybe it's time to call it," he said, voice low. Luis wiped grease off his hands and shook his head. "Call it? You think the Wright brothers called it when their glider broke? Nah, man. They patched it and flew again." Maya smiled gently. "You always said this was for the people who never got a second chance. Remember? Maybe this is your reminder." Frank nodded slowly, his eyes weary, but not defeated. "All right," he said, standing again. "Let's go one more round." The following week, the team worked harder than ever. Sanjay refined the algorithm that controlled the counterweight system. Maya redesigned the stabilizer arms for better balance. Luis modified the frame to handle extra thrust. Frank double-checked every wire and connection by hand, his experience as a field engineer guiding his steady patience. Keanu visited every day, sometimes staying until dawn. He brought food, made calls for parts, and quietly funded each upgrade without saying a word. But what mattered most wasn't the money. It was the way he kept everyone calm. When tempers flared or frustration boiled over, Keanu's steady voice always found a way to reset the room. One morning, the sun rose through the open hangar doors, casting a golden light across the newly assembled drone. The machine gleamed under its weightless shell, 4 rotors perfectly aligned, sensors calibrated to perfection. Frank stood beside it, remote in hand. His fingers hovered over the switch. The room was silent, except for the hum of anticipation. Keanu gave a nod. "Whenever you're ready." Frank exhaled slowly, his pulse steadying. "All right, boys and girls," he said softly. "Let's see if she remembers how to fly." He pressed the switch. The drone's rotors spun to life with a low, deep whir. The air began to shift. Dust lifted from the floor in gentle swirls. The hum deepened into a rising pitch. Then, slowly, almost impossibly, the machine lifted off the ground. 2 inches, 6, a foot. It hovered, wobbling slightly before leveling itself out. The sensors glowed a steady green. Frank's breath caught. "It's flying." Keanu's eyes widened, and a grin spread across his face. "You made it fly." The hangar erupted. Luis threw his hands in the air, shouting, "Looks like you just built hope, old man." Maya laughed through tears. Sanjay fist-pumped the air. Frank just stood there, hands trembling, eyes wet. "Feels like I got a second chance," he said, voice cracking. The drone hovered perfectly above them, steady and sure, before easing back to the ground. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Keanu clapped Frank on the back. "You did it, Frank. You did what they said was impossible." Maya was the first to break the silence, her voice trembling between excitement and disbelief. "We have to record that," she said, rushing for her phone. "Nobody's going to believe it." "Unless they see it." Frank laughed, the sound rough but full of life. "If you tell them it flew, they'll just say we faked it with strings." "Then we'll show them," Keanu said. "Every second." Maya set up her camera, framing the team around the drone. Luis straightened. His shirt, Sanjay wiped his glasses, and Frank took a deep breath. "All right," Maya said, smiling behind the camera. "Let's do it again." Frank nodded. "Here goes nothing." He pressed the switch once more. The rotors spun with a soft roar, the drone rising steadily until it hovered at head height. Maya captured the look on Frank's face. Pure awe, the kind that comes when a dream too long buried finally breathes again. Keanu stepped into frame beside him, his expression warm and proud. "That," he said, "is what belief looks like." Luis shouted, "Let's see it move!" And Frank tilted the remote slightly. The drone drifted forward, balanced and smooth. Maya laughed out loud as it spun gently, performing a perfect circle before returning to center. They erupted in cheers, the sound echoing through the hangar. Luis clapped so hard his palms turned red. "Look at that beauty, old man, you just made history." Frank wiped at his face. "Feels like I just made peace." They spent the next hour testing maneuvers, making small adjustments, and laughing like children. When they finally powered down, Maya uploaded the clip to social media with a simple caption, "It flew." Number, believe in Frank. Within minutes, comments started pouring in. "That's the veteran who was laughed off that show. He actually did it." Keanu Reeves believed when nobody else did. By nightfall, the video had hundreds of thousands of views. Veterans groups shared it with pride. Engineering students analyzed the design frame by frame. News outlets started picking it up, calling it the comeback flight. Frank didn't even know at first. He sat in his small kitchen that evening, the glow of a single lamp above him, unaware of how far his story had already traveled. When Maya called, her voice was full of energy. Frank, you need to see this. You're trending everywhere. He laughed softly. I don't even know what that means. It means people.
Believe again, she said. Because of you. Frank leaned back, smiling to himself.
Guess that little drone finally lifted more than just its own weight. The next morning, the team returned to the hangar to find it buzzing with calls and messages. Reporters had already left voicemails asking for interviews. Veterans associations were requesting demonstrations. Someone had even emailed from the Department of Defense asking about the drone's potential use in disaster zones. Luis shook his head in disbelief. We go to sleep for 6 hours and wake up famous, he said, scrolling through notifications. Frank stood in the middle of the chaos, completely still, as if unsure how to process it. People really care about this? He asked quietly. Maya smiled. They care about you, Frank. You gave them something real. Keanu entered moments later, his calm presence grounding the room. He glanced at the computer screen where the video had surpassed 2 million views overnight. Looks like the world needed a reminder, he said, that it's never too late to make a difference. Frank turned to him, shaking his head in wonder. I don't know what to say, Keanu. You've done more than anyone has in years. Keanu's reply was simple. You did it. I just helped you keep believing. They spent the day answering calls and fine-tuning the drone. Sanjay adjusted the code for remote stability, while Maya prepared a presentation for a safety demo the following week. Luis joked that he'd have to start charging for autographs, and for the first time, even Frank laughed without restraint. That afternoon, they decided to take the drone outside for a full test. The sun was warm, the air still. Frank carried the drone himself, walking slowly to an open patch of concrete behind the hangar. The others followed close behind. He placed it gently on the ground and looked up at the sky. You know, he said softly, I spent years wishing I could go back and save them. Maybe this is the closest I'll ever get. Keanu stepped beside him. Maybe it's not about going back, he said. Maybe it's about passing forward what they gave you. Frank nodded, eyes glistening. He took the controller and started the motors. The drone rose again, smooth and steady, climbing higher this time until it caught the sunlight and shimmered like silver against the blue sky. Luis shaded his eyes. Would you look at that? The thing's a miracle. Frank lowered the drone after a long flight, landing it gently at his feet. The others clapped, but Frank didn't move right away. He looked at the machine, then at the faces around him, and whispered, They already are. The team stood there in the quiet afternoon, watching the reflection of their small miracle gleam in the sun. What began as one man's forgotten dream had become something much greater, a reminder that belief, when shared, could lift more than machines. It could lift hearts. By the end of the week, the story had spread far beyond the walls of the hangar. What started as a quiet social media clip shared under the tag number Believe in Frank had turned into a national headline. News outlets across the country began to cover it, each one with their own variation of the same line. Keanu Reeves funds Veterans' Impossible Invention. Hollywood star helps war hero build life-saving drone. 72-year-old veteran proves it's never too late to change the world. Television. Anchors debated it on morning shows. Talk radio hosts praised it as a story America needed to hear. And thousands of online comments poured in, from retired service members to college students studying engineering. At first, Frank didn't believe the attention was real. The phone at the hangar started ringing non-stop. Journalists wanted interviews. Producers wanted photos. Even schools reached out, asking if he'd speak to students about innovation and perseverance. Frank sat on a stool near his workbench, holding his old flip phone with both hands. They want me on TV, he said, still stunned. What do I even say? Maya laughed. You say the truth, that you didn't give up. Luis patted his shoulder. And maybe get a haircut first. The next morning, Frank found himself sitting in a small studio with bright lights and cameras pointed directly at him. A host smiled across from him at the desk. "Frank Dalton, thank you for joining us. You've become something of a national inspiration overnight. How does that feel?" Frank adjusted his tie, clearly uncomfortable. "Strange," he said honestly. "I didn't set out to inspire anyone. I just wanted to fix something that's been broken for a long time." The host nodded. "You've been quoted thanking Keanu Reeves several times. What makes his involvement so meaningful to you?" Frank's eyes softened. He didn't just fund it, he believed. Everyone else saw an old man with an idea that didn't make sense. He saw someone worth listening to. The audience applauded. Cameras zoomed in on his face as he added quietly, "That kind of belief can change a life." Clips from the interview spread instantly. Within hours, it was trending across social media. News anchors replayed the moment when Frank's voice cracked on air. It became the emotional core of the story. The humility of a man who never asked for fame, only for a chance to finish what he started. Meanwhile, Keanu stayed out of the spotlight. When reporters reached out for interviews, his team politely declined. He spent his days in the hangar instead, working beside Luis and Sanjay to refine the prototype. To him, the real story wasn't the attention, it was the progress. The drone now passed nearly every test they put it through, from weightlifting trials to emergency flight stabilization. Still, wherever he went, people began to recognize him not as the movie star, but as the man who believed in a forgotten veteran. He accepted their gratitude quietly, always redirecting the praise back to Frank. He did the work. He'd say simply, "I just gave him the runway." ChatGPT, Da Noi. As the days passed, the story took on a life of its own. News channels replayed Frank's words in slow motion, accompanied by orchestral music and dramatic captions. He didn't just fund it, he believed. It became a line that resonated far beyond the screen. On one network, a veteran-turned-journalist choked up as he spoke about Frank's courage. "This isn't just about a drone," he said. "It's about a man who never stopped serving, even after the uniform came off." Across the internet, debate began to swirl. Comment sections filled with discussions about ageism, innovation, and how many great minds were dismissed simply for being older. One post that went viral read, "We stopped believing in the people who built this country. Keanu reminded us to start again." The words were shared hundreds of thousands of times. Back at the hangar, Frank avoided most of the noise. He preferred the whir of tools to the chatter of pundits. But every so often, Maya would read him a comment aloud. Messages from veterans who said they felt seen again. From teachers who showed their students the video in class. From parents who said they'd started tinkering with their kids in the garage because of him. Each message hit Frank differently. He wasn't used to gratitude from strangers. "I didn't do anything special," he said once, shaking his head. "I just finished what I started." Keanu smiled. "That's more than most people ever do." They continued testing the drone, now in open fields beyond the city. A small crowd of local reporters began showing up, taking photos of each flight. Frank didn't mind them anymore. His hands no longer shook when he held the controller. His voice no longer carried doubt. One morning, as the drone lifted steadily into a bright sky, Keanu stood beside him, hands in his pockets. The air was crisp, the horizon glowing gold. "You realize you've become a symbol, right?" Keanu said. Frank laughed softly. "Symbols don't build things. People do." Keanu nodded. "Exactly." That evening, one of the national networks aired a segment titled "The Man Who Built Hope." Footage from the hangar played alongside clips from Frank's old service records and scenes from the original show where he'd been laughed off stage. The contrast struck viewers everywhere, a story that had come full circle. When asked for closing remarks, the anchor smiled and said, "Sometimes all it takes is one person to believe." Back in his small apartment, Frank watched the broadcast with quiet tears in his eyes. The camera zoomed in on his hands, steadying the drone's remote, on Keanu smiling proudly. Beside him, and on the headline that had started it all, he leaned back, whispering to himself, "Guess we finally made them believe." The sound of the drone from that morning still echoed faintly in his mind, a reminder that after years of being ignored, forgotten, and dismissed, he had finally done what he set out to do. He had built something that could lift not only debris, but hope. 6 months later, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly beneath a cloudless sky. Wind rolled across the sand, carrying with it the scent of fuel and dust. At the edge of a sprawling test field stood the insignia of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, painted proudly on a chain-link gate. Beyond it, tents, vehicles, and uniformed personnel filled the space like a small outpost. A convoy pulled in through the gates. Frank Dalton sat in the back seat, staring out at the massive equipment scattered across the site. The car bounced over uneven terrain as they approached a large open pad where metal panels and test dummies had been arranged. Beside him, Maya tapped a nervous rhythm on her knee. "They're not just testing it," she said quietly. "They're evaluating it for field deployment." Luis grinned from the front seat. "You realize what that means, right? The military might actually use your design in real rescue missions." Frank adjusted his cap, the same faded one he'd worn since Afghanistan. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about the people this thing can save." When the convoy stopped, Keanu stepped out first. He wore dark jeans, a simple jacket, and sunglasses. There was no entourage, no cameras, just him, quietly walking toward the officers who waited by the field. A colonel approached, tall and composed, his uniform crisp in the sunlight. "Mr. Reeves," he said, shaking his hand. "Mr. Dalton, it's an honor to have you both here." Frank straightened. "The honor's mine, sir." The colonel nodded toward the drone resting on a tarp nearby, freshly painted in matte silver with small red cross markings on its wings. "This is the one?" Frank smiled faintly. "Version 3.5. She's come a long way since the hangar." The colonel looked impressed. "Our engineers reviewed your specs. Lightweight design, modular battery, and a self-balancing system, very innovative. We're eager to see what she can do." Frank nodded, gripping the remote controller tightly. His palms were already sweating. Maya whispered, "You've got this, Frank." Keanu stood behind him, calm and steady, hands in his pockets. "Just like before," he said quietly. "One breath, then go." Frank inhaled, pressed the power switch, and the drone came alive. Its rotors spun with a deep, powerful hum that carried across the test site. Soldiers paused to watch as the machine lifted into the air, steady as a hawk. It rose 10 feet, 20, 30, holding position perfectly despite the gusting desert wind. Frank began the first demonstration. The drone tilted forward and flew toward a pile of debris. Its camera locked on a buried heat source, a simulation of a trapped body. It hovered above, releasing a soft mechanical beep to signal detection. The colonel nodded in approval. Then Frank triggered the second function. The drone lowered a small arm, lifting a steel panel that weighed over 100 pounds. Dust swirled around it, sunlight glinting off its frame as it carried the panel aside and set it down with precision. Keanu's eyes followed the drone's smooth motion, a smile forming at the corner of his mouth. "She's flying with purpose," he said quietly. Frank switched to the final sequence, his hands steady on the controls. The drone climbed higher, pivoted, and released a small container that drifted down by parachute. It landed near a mock casualty site where medics opened it to reveal neatly packed first aid supplies, bandages, emergency rations, and thermal blankets. A murmur of surprise spread among the officers. The colonel stepped forward, shading his eyes against the sun. "That delivery system's impressive," he said. "Range? 10 miles, sir," Sanjay answered proudly. "But with new batteries, we can extend that." Frank guided the drone back to base, where it landed smoothly on the designated pad. For, in a moment, no one moved. The air was filled only with the sound of the rotors slowing to a stop. Then the colonel smiled, a small, genuine smile that said more than any speech. "You've built something extraordinary, Mr. Dalton." Frank blinked, trying to steady himself. "Thank you, sir," he said, voice breaking slightly. The colonel shook his hand firmly. "This could save lives in disasters, earthquakes, wildfires, war zones. We'll be running full trials next month. You and your team will be there." Frank stood still, overwhelmed. Maya threw her arms around him, laughing through tears. Louise clapped him on the back so hard his cap nearly fell off. "You did it, old man. You really did it." Keanu walked up beside him, his smile quiet and proud. "Told you it wasn't impossible." Frank turned toward him, eyes shining. "No," he said softly. "You told me I wasn't." The colonel overheard and gave a small nod of respect. "That's the kind of partnership we need more of in this country." As the officers walked away to make notes, Keanu stayed with Frank, both of them watching the drone glint under the Nevada sun. Frank wiped his eyes, embarrassed. "Guess I'm getting soft in my old age." Keanu chuckled. "You're allowed. You've earned it." They stood in silence for a while, just looking at the sky. The others chatted excitedly nearby, already planning upgrades. Finally, Frank spoke again, his tone gentle but full of conviction. "You know, Keanu, I used to think my best work was behind me. But maybe it was just waiting for the right hands to help me finish it." Keanu nodded. "Sometimes the right hands show up when you need them most." As the sun dipped lower, the field filled with golden light. The soldiers packed up their gear. The team loaded the drone into its case, and the hum of engines echoed across the desert. Frank took one last look at the empty sky and smiled. For the first time since the war, he felt whole. The men he'd lost weren't gone anymore. Not really. They lived in the invention now, in the hope it carried, in the belief it had reignited. He turned to Keanu and said quietly, "Let's take her home." Keanu smiled back. "Yeah, let's take her home." As they drove away, the drone's reflection caught the setting sun in the rearview mirror, shining bright, like the promise of something that would never fade. Months later, the bright lights of the greatest inventor blazed once again, but this time, the atmosphere was different. The stage that once echoed with laughter now carried a sense of anticipation. The network had promoted the special for weeks, a reunion of redemption. Every seat in the audience was filled. The producers had spared no expense. Yet even among the gleaming displays and cameras, there was a quieter tone in the air, a kind of collective humility. Backstage, Frank stood in front of a mirror, straightening the collar of his old army jacket. The patches were worn, the fabric faded, but it was the only thing he wanted to wear tonight. Maya fussed over his tie while Louise teased, "You sure you don't want a tuxedo, General?" Frank smiled. "This old jacket's been through more than any tux ever will." Keanu appeared behind them, dressed simply in a black suit. He met Frank's reflection in the mirror and gave a reassuring nod. "You ready for this?" Frank exhaled slowly. "I thought I left this stage behind forever." Keanu smiled. "You did, but this time, it's on your terms." The stage manager called from the doorway. "Mr. Dalton, you're up next." As Frank stepped toward the curtain, he caught a glimpse of the host on stage. The same man who once hurried him off during his failed presentation now stood under the spotlight, his tone sober, his words measured. "Tonight," the host said, "we welcome back a man who reminded us all that invention isn't just about technology, it's about heart." Sometimes, the greatest invention isn't the machine itself, but the courage to believe again. The audience applauded. Softer this time. Not for entertainment, but out of respect. The curtain opened, and Frank stepped into the light. He paused, blinking against the brightness, his old boots scuffing the polished floor. The crowd rose to their feet, applause growing louder until it filled the studio. Frank looked out at the faces, some smiling, some teary-eyed, and felt a lump rise in his throat. Behind him, a massive screen came to life, showing footage of rescue drones flying through hurricane wreckage, dropping supplies to trapped survivors. The videos had been recorded only weeks earlier. He watched as one of his drones lifted a fallen beam off a collapsed shelter, while volunteers cheered below. The audience gasped and clapped even louder. Frank turned back toward them, overwhelmed. I never imagined I'd be back here," he began. "Last time I stood on this stage, I was walking away with my head down. I thought I'd failed. But what I didn't know was that failure isn't the end. Sometimes it's just the door that leads to the next chance." He paused as the crowd listened in silence, hanging on every word. Frank took a breath and glanced toward the front row. Keanu sat there, hands folded, a calm smile on his face. For a moment, the noise of the crowd faded, and it was as if only the two of them existed, the man who had built something from scraps and the man who had refused to let him give up. Frank's voice grew steadier. "I didn't come here tonight to talk about machines or metals," he said. "I came here because there are people watching this who've been told they're too old, too late, or too broken to start again. I was one of them." The audience grew still. Camera zoomed in close as his eyes shimmered with emotion. When you spend your life being useful, building, fixing, serving, and then suddenly the world tells you you're finished, it's like being erased while you're still standing. I know that feeling. But one man reminded me that I still mattered. He looked at Keanu again, his expression softening. "I didn't need Keanu Reeves to save me," he said. "He just reminded me that I was still worth believing in." The words hung in the air, echoing through the studio. Then the applause came slow, heartfelt, and growing until it became thunderous. The audience stood again. Even the judges who once dismissed him rose to their feet. Some wiped their eyes. Keanu's expression didn't change much, but his eyes glistened. He clapped along with everyone else, though his applause was slower, quieter, like someone honoring a promise fulfilled. Frank smiled through tears. "I guess belief is a kind of invention too," he said. "You build it, piece by piece, out of hope and hard work. And if you share it long enough, it starts to build others." The host approached, him visibly moved. "Mr. Dalton," he said, "on behalf of everyone here, I want to apologize. You deserved better the first time you stood on this stage." Frank nodded kindly. "We all deserve a second look. Sometimes people just need time to see what was always there." The host stepped aside, gesturing to the big screen again. For those who don't know, Mr. Dalton's drones are now being deployed by disaster response teams across the country. His invention has already saved over 100 lives. Gasps and applause filled the studio. Frank's hands shook as he covered his mouth, overcome. He whispered, "I didn't know it was that many." Maya, Luis, and Sanjay, watching from the side of the stage, began cheering, and the cameras panned to them. Luis shouted, "Told you, old man," while Maya wiped tears, whispering, "You did it." Frank steadied himself, his voice breaking once more. "They did it with me, every one of them, and so did all the veterans who never stopped believing in service, even when no one was watching." Keanu rose quietly from his seat. The camera caught him nodding with pride as Frank looked his way once more. "Thank you, Keanu," Frank said, "for giving me my fight back." Keanu smiled gently and said, just loud enough for the microphone to catch, "You never lost it." The lights dimmed slightly as the screen behind Frank shifted to one final image, a rescue worker holding a small child under the words, "Believe again." The audience fell silent, then erupted once more, applause shaking the studio. Frank stood there for a long moment, hand over his heart, his jacket glinting beneath the stage lights. He had walked onto this stage once as a failure, and now he stood as proof that some stories are worth rewriting. In the weeks that followed his appearance on The Greatest Inventor, Frank's life changed in ways he could never have imagined. Letters arrived at his doorstep from across the country, some from fellow veterans, others from high school students who said his story had pushed them to keep creating. He didn't see himself as a celebrity, but something new had begun to form around him, a movement of belief. Veterans organizations started reaching out almost immediately. The American Legion asked him to speak at a convention in Washington. The Veterans Innovation Council invited him to share his process for designing life-saving tools. Frank accepted each invitation humbly, always beginning his talks the same way. "I'm not a genius. I'm just a man who didn't stop believing that broken things can be fixed." The first time he spoke to a classroom of high school students, he stood in front of them holding one of the prototype drones. It was dented from testing, one rotor slightly scarred. "You don't need perfection to start something great," he told them. "You just need courage and one small reason to try again." The students gave him a standing ovation. Afterward, a shy boy with thick glasses approached and said, "My dad's a vet too. He used to build model planes before he got hurt. Can I show him this video?" Frank smiled and put a hand on his shoulder. "You tell him, it's never too late to fly again." The words traveled far beyond that classroom. Within months, Frank's message became the heart of a growing initiative. With Maya's help, he filed paperwork for a new nonprofit called the Second Mission Project. Its purpose was simple: to help veterans use their skills, creativity, and resilience to develop inventions that could serve humanity. Disaster relief devices, mobility aids, clean water systems, and more. Frank converted the old Burbank hangar into a training center. The same space that once echoed with the hum of his first prototype now rang with the sound of drills, soldering irons, and laughter. Rows of workbenches filled the hangar, each station occupied by veterans from different generations. Men and women who had once worn uniforms and now wore safety goggles. Maya managed logistics. Luis taught basic engineering. Sanjay handled design systems and coding workshops. Frank moved between tables like a mentor, helping one person calibrate a sensor and another stabilize a frame. When reporters tried to cover the nonprofit's launch, Frank gave credit to his team and the donors who supported them. What the cameras didn't show was that one of those donors was Keanu himself. He had quietly transferred funds to cover the first year of operations, insisting his name never appear on the official records. "Let it belong to them," he said when Maya asked why. "That's the point." Frank never learned the full amount Keanu had contributed. He only noticed that whenever they needed supplies, they somehow arrived the next day, no questions asked. One quiet evening, long after the last soldering iron had cooled, Frank stayed behind to tidy up the workshop. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of amber light across the windows. He moved slowly between the tables, straightening tools, unplugging machines, and smiling at the scraps of half-finished projects scattered around. Each one represented a dream reignited: a prosthetic arm designed by a Marine, a water purifier sketched by a Navy medic, a solar-powered stretcher frame built by an Army mechanic. He paused at the far end of the hangar, where the original drone hung from the ceiling like a relic of faith. Beneath it sat a plaque the team had made: the Second Mission Project, founded by Frank Dalton, for those who never stopped serving. As he read the words, he heard the creak of the hangar door opening. Keanu stepped inside, wearing his familiar black jacket, a small paper bag of takeout in hand. "You still here?" he asked with a smile. "Figured I'd find you talking to your machines again." Frank chuckled. "They listen better than most people." Keanu walked closer, setting the food on a table. "You've built something beautiful here, Frank." Frank leaned on his cane, looking around. "They built it. I just showed them it was possible." Keanu studied the room. The veterans laughing and old photos pinned to the walls. The smell of metal and coffee still hanging in the air. "You did it, Frank," he said softly. Frank turned to him, his eyes warm. "No, we did." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the distant highway barely audible through the walls. Keanu took a seat on one of the stools, watching Frank work. "You know," he said, "most people think helping someone means giving them something. But what you've done, it's different. You gave them a reason to believe again." Frank nodded slowly. "You taught me that. I used to think the best years of my life were behind me. Now I get to watch these men and women light up when they realize their ideas matter." Keanu smiled. "That's what healing looks like." Outside, the night deepened. The drone above them swayed slightly in the air current from the ceiling fan, its metal wings catching the light. Frank looked up at it and said, "You know, Keanu, when I was in Afghanistan, I used to tell my men that every mission had two parts, the one you were assigned and the one you discovered along the way. I think this might be my second mission." Keanu nodded. "Then I'd say it's a successful one." They shared a quiet laugh before Frank handed him a wrench. "Then help me finish cleaning up, partner. Tomorrow's a big day. We've got 20 new veterans coming in." Keanu grinned, rolling up his sleeves. "Wouldn't miss it." And as they worked side by side under the gentle hum of the lights, the spirit of the second mission filled the product, room proof that belief, once sparked, never truly dies. Maya sat in the workshop one quiet afternoon, surrounded by cables, memory cards, and stacks of hard drives filled with months of footage. Each file was a piece of their story. Keanu's calm encouragement, Luis's jokes, Frank's shaky hands guiding the first test flight. The hangar had become more than a workplace. It was a living memory of everything they had fought for. She spent hours reviewing every clip, stitching them together into something timeless. The video began with the moment Frank was humiliated on stage, then moved through their first failures, their laughter during late-night sessions, the drone's first flight, the Nevada demonstration, and finally, the creation of the second mission project. For the background, she used a voice recording Keanu had made months earlier, his slow, reflective tone filling the silence as she edited. "Faith in others builds things no blueprint ever could," his voice said, softly over the image of Frank tightening a bolt on the prototype. "Machines can lift metal, but belief that lifts people." When she finished, Maya watched the video one last time before hitting upload. The title was simple: The Second Mission, Believing Again. Within hours, it began spreading faster than anyone expected. By midnight, it had reached 1 million views. By morning, it had 10 times that. The comment section flooded with stories from all over the world. Engineers, teachers, and veterans who saw themselves in Frank's journey. One comment read, "I showed this to my granddad. He hasn't touched his workbench in years. Today, he's building again." Another said, "I watched this with my daughter. She said that's what heroes look like now." The workshop phone rang non-stop that day. Invitations poured in from universities, from nonprofits, from people who wanted to volunteer. But Frank wasn't there to see it. He was home, sitting quietly, on his porch with a blanket over his knees, the afternoon sun settling on the horizon. His small house overlooked a narrow field, where wildflowers grew tall in the summer. A laptop sat open on the table beside him, showing the thumbnail of Maya's video. He clicked it, the soft music filling the quiet yard. As the images played, his eyes followed every frame, the laughter, the failures, the triumphs. His lips trembled as he whispered, "We really did it." The drone footage faded into a slow montage of veterans working in the hangar, smiling, teaching, creating. And over it, Keanu's voice spoke again. "Sometimes, the hardest battles aren't fought overseas. They're fought here, inside us. And when we find the courage to fight them, we build more than machines. We rebuild ourselves." Frank leaned back in his chair, his heart full. He whispered, "Maybe I finally kept my promise to my men." The sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the porch in amber light. Frank let the warmth settle across his face, as the final scenes of the video played on his laptop. The screen showed Keanu standing in the hangar beside him, both of them laughing after the drone's first successful flight. The sound of that laughter-free, unguarded, brought a smile to Frank's face. He turned up the volume slightly, and Keanu's closing words came through the speakers. You don't need to wear a uniform to serve. Sometimes service means showing up for someone else's dream. Sometimes it's reminding them that they still matter. Frank's eyes glistened. He paused the video and stared at the frozen frame of Keanu's calm expression. You did that, kid, he whispered. You reminded me. Inside the house, the phone buzzed again. Another reporter, another invitation. He ignored it. For once, he didn't need the world's attention. The quiet was enough. The peace was enough. He looked out across the open field, where the evening wind bent the tall grass into soft waves. In his mind, he could still hear the roar of helicopters from long ago, the shouted orders, the scraping of metal and dust. But now those sounds faded into something gentler, the hum of his drone, the laughter of his new team, the voices of young veterans learning to build instead of break. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver dog tag, worn smooth by time. It belonged to one of the men he'd lost in Afghanistan. He held it between his fingers and whispered, We kept our promise, brother. We built something that saves lives. A few minutes later, the sound of a familiar motorcycle rolled up the gravel path. Frank turned to see Keanu climbing off his bike, removing his helmet, and walking toward the porch with that same calm smile. Thought you'd be here, Keanu said, leaning on the railing. You've seen the video, huh? Frank nodded. It's beautiful. She caught everything, the struggle, the heart, the hope. Keanu sat beside him, the boards creaking softly beneath their weight. It's everywhere now. 10 million views and counting. People are starting projects like yours all over the world. Frank's brows lifted. All over the world? Everywhere, Keanu said. You didn't just build a drone, Frank. You built a movement. Frank laughed quietly. Guess I finally built something that flies on its own. Keanu smiled. You built something that doesn't need batteries to keep going. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the horizon fade into twilight. The air smelled faintly of pine and motor oil. Somewhere in the distance, the faint buzz of another drone echoed a test unit flown by one of the veterans from the second mission project. It circled overhead, steady and sure, before drifting back toward the workshop. Frank followed it with his eyes until it disappeared behind the trees. You know, he said softly, I spent half my life trying to save people who were already gone. I think I finally understand that saving lives isn't just about pulling someone out of the rubble. It's about helping them remember they can stand again. Keanu nodded. That's the kind of rescue that lasts. Frank leaned back, closing his eyes as the last of the sunset faded. For the first time in decades, the memories didn't hurt. They just existed. Part of him, softened by purpose. Keanu stood and rested a hand on Frank's shoulder. You've earned your rest, old friend. Frank smiled without opening his eyes. Yeah, he whispered. For once, I think I have. As the night settled over the porch, the glow from the laptop dimmed, leaving only the sound of crickets and the steady hum of belief that still filled the air. The following spring, banners lined the Grand Hall of the National Science and Humanitarian Expo in Washington, D.C. The theme read in bold letters across the stage, Innovation in Service of Humanity. Hundreds of engineers, scientists, veterans, and inventors filled the seats, the air charged with anticipation and pride. Among them sat Frank Dalton, wearing his modest suit and the same faded army pin on his lapel. He looked slightly out of place amid the polished crowd and flashing cameras, but the warmth in his smile said everything. Maya, Luis, and Sanjay flanked him on either side, and at the end of the row, dressed in his usual understated style, sat Keanu Reeves' quiet, composed, and unmistakably proud. When Frank's name was announced, the hall fell into respectful silence before the applause began, slow at first, then rising until it filled the room. On stage, the presenter, a decorated scientist in a dark blue suit, smiled as he adjusted the microphone. "Tonight," he began, "we honor not just a man, but a movement. Mr. Frank Dalton reminds us that the power of innovation doesn't end with youth, and that service to humanity can take many forms. His creation, the Dalton Rescue Drone, has already saved lives in natural disasters across 3 continents. But perhaps even more importantly, it has reignited belief in those who once felt forgotten." The applause resumed, longer and louder. Frank looked down, blinking hard, his hands trembling slightly. Keanu leaned over and whispered, "Go on, they're waiting for you." Frank stood, gripping his cane in one hand and the armrest with the other. The audience rose to its feet as he made his way toward the stage. Keanu followed beside him, keeping a steadying hand at his back. Together, they walked up the steps, 2 figures linked by quiet grace. When they reached the podium, the presenter smiled warmly and handed Frank the medal. "Mr. Dalton," he said, "on behalf of the National Academy, it's an honor to present you with the Humanitarian Technology Award." The room fell completely silent as Frank accepted the medal, its golden edge glinting beneath the lights. He turned it over in his hand as though it were something fragile, something almost too meaningful to touch. After a long pause, he leaned toward the microphone. "I'm not used to fancy speeches," he said with a chuckle that drew gentle laughter from the crowd. "I've spent most of my life working with my hands, not microphones." The laughter faded into a hush as his tone grew tender. "This isn't about fame or fortune," he said. "It's about being seen, about remembering that even when life changes us, when we get older, slower, or forgotten, we still have something to give." The room grew completely still as Frank's words sank in. Even the soft hum of the lights seemed to quiet. He looked out over the sea of faces, young engineers in suits, gray-haired veterans in dress, coats, students holding notebooks, and continued softly, "For years I thought my best work was behind me. I thought the world had passed me by. Then someone reminded me that belief isn't something you earn once and lose forever. It's something you rebuild, piece by piece, every time you choose to try again." He glanced toward Keanu, standing near the front row, his head slightly bowed. "That someone was sitting right there," Frank said. "He saw value where others saw failure. He believed when the world laughed, and because of that, I got to finish the mission I started 50 years ago." Keanu's eyes glistened. He gave a small nod, lips pressed together, unable to hide his emotion. The crowd followed Frank's gaze, some whispering softly, recognizing the quiet man who had turned one act of faith into a movement of change. Frank lifted the medal slightly, letting the light catch its surface. "This doesn't belong to me alone," he said. "It belongs to every veteran who came home and wondered if their story still mattered. It belongs to every hand that built something for someone else. It belongs to every young person who's ever been told they're too late to start again." The applause began slowly. 1 or 2 claps at first, then a wave of sound that filled the entire hall. It wasn't the sharp, performative applause of a ceremony. It was deep, resonant, and full of heart. People stood to their feet, row by row, until the entire audience was standing, clapping through tears. The presenter wiped his eyes behind the podium. "Mr. Dalton," he said softly, "thank you for reminding us what belief can do." Frank turned back toward Keanu and gestured for him to join him on stage. The audience erupted once more as Keanu rose and walked up the steps. When he reached the top, Frank took his hand, steadying himself. "Come on up here, partner," he said with a grin. "You didn't think you were getting out of this part, did you?" Keanu chuckled and stood beside him. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the 2 of them framed by the glowing banner of innovation in service of humanity. Frank leaned close and said, "We started this together. We finish it together." Keanu nodded, his voice low but audible. "You were always the builder, Frank. I just handed you the hammer." The audience laughed gently, still wiping their eyes. Frank smiled and turned back to the microphone. "You know," he said, "I once told Keanu that failure is just the first step toward flight. Tonight, I think I finally understand what that meant. We built something that flies, but not because of metal or code. It flies because of faith." The applause thundered again, rising and echoing through the hall. Cameras flashed, journalists leaned forward, and for a moment, every person in that vast room felt the same quiet truth, that hope, once shared, multiplies. Frank lowered the microphone, his breathing uneven, the metal shining against his chest. Keanu put a steady arm around his shoulder as they faced the crowd together. The camera panned across the two men, one famous, one forgotten, united not by status, but by belief. Frank whispered something to Keanu that only he could hear. "Guess I finally made peace with the past." Keanu nodded, his voice barely audible, "and gave the world a future." As the lights dimmed and the audience continued to applaud, the image of the two men standing side by side became the closing shot broadcast that night across every major network. It would replay for weeks, an image of humility, healing, and humanity. Months later, monsoon clouds swallowed the coast of the Philippines. Typhoon Samira had torn through several provinces, leaving entire neighborhoods buried beneath broken roofs and fallen trees. The air was thick with humidity and dust. In the distance, helicopters rumbled, and rescue teams worked frantically, calling out names over radios that crackled. In the wind, among the chaos, a group of local responders unloaded metallic cases, marked with the insignia of the Second Mission Project. Inside each case was a compact, silver drone Frank Dalton's creation. Technicians unfolded the arms, secured the rotors, and powered them up. Within minutes, the air filled with a hum of dozens of machines lifting into the sky. They moved in synchronized patterns, scanning the wreckage with infrared sensors. One drone spotted movement beneath a collapsed house. It hovered, projecting a small red beacon that guided rescue crews directly to the site. Another located a group of trapped children and dropped emergency medical kits and bottled water. Reporters filmed from nearby hills as the drones continued their work. The footage that emerged later that day would capture something extraordinary. Machines lifting steel beams, delivering aid, and saving lives in real time. By evening, international news channels were broadcasting the story. A banner scrolled across the screen. "Veteran's invention saves dozens after typhoon." Half a world away in Los Angeles, Keanu Reeves sat alone in his living room, watching the footage in silence. The glow from the television flickered across his face. He saw the drone marked with Frank's name glide through a shattered village, its sensors lighting up a child's faint heartbeat beneath the debris. He exhaled slowly, his chest tightening with emotion. The reporter's voice narrated, "These life-saving drones, developed by a team led by retired Army engineer Frank Dalton, are now being hailed as one of the most important humanitarian innovations of the decade." Keanu leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His eyes followed every frame, the rescuers cheering, the drone lifting a panel off two trapped civilians, the small Filipino boy waving at the sky as one of the drones flew overhead. When the report ended, Keanu muted the screen and sat in stillness for a long, taking moment. On the coffee table lay a stack of unopened mail, but one envelope caught his eye, a small, cream-colored one with Frank's familiar handwriting. The postmark was from 2 weeks earlier. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in steady, deliberate handwriting. "They're flying, Keanu. You help them fly." Beneath the words was a simple drawing, two small drones lifting a beam together, the outline of a sun rising in the background. Keanu smiled faintly, his eyes misting. He folded the letter, and set it beside an old black and white photograph of Frank in uniform from his early Army days, the same one he'd once shown during a late night at the hangar. He reached for a frame and placed both the note and the photo inside. Then he hung it on the wall of his study, above his desk where sunlight streamed in each morning. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the framed note, casting a soft glow on the words. Keanu paused in front of it, with his coffee, reading the line again. "They're flying, Keanu. You helped them fly." He smiled quietly to himself. It wasn't pride. He felt it was peace. The kind that comes when something ends exactly as it should. He sat down, turned on the news again, and saw more footage, this time from a different part of the Philippines. A rescue team was holding up one of Frank's drones in front of the camera, its rotors still spinning faintly. "We couldn't have reached them without this," one responder said, voice shaking with gratitude. "It saved entire families." Behind the team, a banner hung from a tent, hand-painted in English and Tagalog. "Thank you, Frank Dalton and the second mission." Keanu's eyes softened. He leaned back and whispered, "You'd have loved to see this, old man." Later that week, he drove to the hangar in Burbank. It looked different now, cleaner, more organized, yet still filled with that familiar hum of purpose. Veterans and volunteers moved between tables, working on new projects, disaster drones, solar panels, floating medical kits. Maya greeted him with a bright smile. "You saw the footage?" He nodded. "Yeah, the world saw it too." She led him to a corner where Frank's original workbench stood untouched, preserved, just as he'd left it. The tools were still lined up neatly. A small plaque hung above the bench with Frank's words engraved. "Failure is the first step toward flight." Keanu stood there in silence for a long time. "He really changed things," Maya said softly beside him. "He did more than that," Keanu replied. "He reminded people what belief looks like." Before leaving, he walked to the center of the hangar, where a new prototype drone rested, a larger model, painted white, with Frank's initials, F.D., printed on its side. A small inscription near the control panel read, "Dedicated to Frank Dalton, Builder of Hope." Keanu brushed his fingers over the lettering and smiled. "Still flying," he murmured. As he stepped outside, a light breeze swept across the lot, carrying the faint whir of engines from a nearby test flight. He looked up just in time to see one of the new drones rise into the sky, its shadow stretching across the concrete below. It climbed higher and higher, until it was just a glimmer of light against the vast blue. Keanu watched it disappear into the clouds, his heart full. Sometimes the biggest victories didn't make headlines or red carpets. They were quiet, steady, and deeply human, the kind that lived on through the lives they touched. He smiled, turned toward his motorcycle, and whispered, "Fly safe, Frank." The wind carried his words away as he rode off, the sound of the engine blending with the soft hum of another drone lifting into the sky. A year passed quietly, like the slow turning of a final page. The world kept moving. Storms came and went. New inventions emerged. But in one small corner of Los Angeles, time seemed to pause. Inside a modest house at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, sunlight poured through thin curtains, landing gently on an old wooden nightstand. On it sat a single medal, the Humanitarian Technology Award, resting beside a folded letter and a pair of glasses. Frank Dalton had passed peacefully in his sleep sometime before dawn. His heart, tired but full, had simply decided it was time to rest. When the morning light reached his face, it found only calm, the kind of peace he had spent a lifetime chasing. The news spread slowly at first, then rippled across the world. Veterans groups posted tributes online. Schools where he had spoken lowered their flags. In the workshop at the Second Mission Project, the sound of tools fell silent as Maya gathered the team and read the message aloud. "Frank's gone home." No one spoke for several minutes. Luis set down his wrench and walked outside, his hands shaking. Sanjay sat with his head bowed, whispering a quiet prayer. Maya wiped her tears, then looked toward the old hangar wall, where Frank's photo hung above the plaque that read Builder of Hope. A week later, the funeral took place at a Veterans Memorial Park just outside Burbank. The sky was clear, the air still. Rows of folding chairs were arranged beneath an American flag that fluttered gently in the breeze. The crowd that gathered was unlike any the park had ever seen. Veterans in uniform, engineers in lab coats, students carrying notebooks, and everyday people whose lives had been touched by Frank's story. At the front stood a framed photo of Frank smiling beside his first working drone, the same one that had lifted hope into the air years before. The medal lay beside it on a small wooden table, shining softly in the morning light. When Keanu arrived, he greeted everyone quietly, shaking hands, offering hugs, and staying mostly in the background. But when the time came for the eulogy, Maya turned toward him and whispered, "He would have wanted it to be you." Keanu hesitated, looking down at the grass, then nodded. "All right," he said softly. "I'll do it." He stepped forward, adjusting the microphone as the crowd fell into silence. Behind him, the flag rustled gently, and the sound of distant birds filled the air. Keanu took a deep breath. Frank Dalton wasn't just an inventor, he began. He was a man who built more than machines. He built faith. He built second chances. He built belief. He paused, scanning the faces before him. I once watched him spend hours fixing a motor that everyone else said was beyond repair. When I asked him why he kept trying, he said, "Because if something's broken, it's just waiting for someone to believe in it again." The words lingered in the air, heavy and true. Keanu continued, his voice calm but edged with emotion. Frank didn't invent a machine, he invented hope. And in doing so, he reminded all of us that the most powerful thing we can build isn't made of steel or code, but of courage. The courage to start again when the world tells you you're finished. A hush fell over the crowd. Even the breeze seemed to still. Veterans in uniform stood with hands clasped behind their backs, heads bowed. Engineers who had once worked beside Frank wiped their eyes. Keanu's gaze lifted toward the framed photo on the stand. He told me once that he wanted to make something that could lift what human hands couldn't. I think he did that not just with his drone, but with his heart. He lifted people who were buried under doubt, under loss, under the weight of being forgotten. He stepped back slightly, swallowing hard. I was one of them. The crowd was silent. The admission hung in the air, like a secret finally spoken. Keanu's voice softened. There was a time when I thought belief was just a word. Then I met Frank. He taught me that belief is an action. It's something you do, not something you feel. You show up, you keep going, and you lift someone else when they can't stand. He looked out over the rows of faces. If you ever find yourself doubting what one person can do, remember Frank Dalton. He didn't wait for the world to believe in him, he believed first. A few in the crowd nodded through tears. Maya covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Luis lowered his head, whispering, "Amen." When Keanu stepped down, the applause didn't come immediately. Instead, there was silence. The kind of silence reserved for respect, too deep for words. Then slowly, the sound began to build, soft clapping, joined by more, until the entire park filled with a wave of heartfelt applause that carried across the open air. After the service, as the sun dipped lower, Maya walked to the front, holding a small silver drone. It was one of Frank's originals, restored and polished. She turned to the crowd and said quietly, "He always said he wanted his work to keep flying, even when he couldn't." She pressed a button on the controller. The drone's lights blinked softly, its rotors spinning to life with a familiar hum. Everyone watched as it lifted off the ground, rising steadily into the sky. The sound of the motors faded as it climbed higher, the blinking lights shrinking against the blue. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint whirring of the drone as it disappeared into the clouds. Keanu looked up, his eyes glistening. Maya stood beside him, whispering, "He'd like this, wouldn't he?" Keanu nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "He'd say it's a good day for flying." The crowd remained standing long after the drone vanished from sight. The flag continued to wave gently in the breeze, and the metal at the front table caught the last light of the sun, glowing gold. For a moment, it felt as if Frank was still there somewhere above them, guiding the machine he'd built, smiling down at the world he had helped lift. A fitting farewell for a man who had taught everyone what it meant to believe again. A year later, the hangar that had once been filled with the hum of Frank's first drone had transformed into something far greater than any of them could have imagined. The sign outside now read, "The Second Mission Project, Veterans Building the Future." Inside, sunlight streamed through high windows, glinting off polished metal and scattered blueprints. The air smelled of sawdust, machine oil, and fresh coffee. The scent of purpose. Rows of workstations stretched across the open floor, each one occupied by veterans and students working side by side. Some tinkered with parts of rescue drones. Others tested new designs for water filtration systems or portable shelters. Laughter filled the space, mingling with the rhythmic sound of tools. At the far end of the hangar, a new memorial wall displayed photos of Frank Dalton smiling in uniform, shaking hands with Keanu, teaching younger vets how to solder. Beneath the largest photo were the words he had once said on national television, "I didn't need to be saved. I just needed to be believed in." Keanu stood quietly near the entrance, watching as Maya guided a group of new recruits through a tour of the facility. Her voice carried easily through the room. "Everything you see here started because one man refused to give up," she said. "He didn't just build a drone, he built a place where people could believe again." Luis called out from a nearby table, holding up a new prototype. "Hey Maya, tell our visitors this one's gonna fly twice as far as Frank's model." Maya laughed. "Not unless you stop breaking the rotors, Luis." The room erupted in friendly laughter. Even Keanu smiled, his eyes glancing upward toward the massive banner hanging from the rafters. It read, "Every dream deserves a second mission." He walked toward the center of the room, pausing beside the old wooden workbench that Frank used to claim as his own. It had been preserved exactly as it was, the scratches, the burn marks, even the small note taped to the corner that read, "Failure is the first step toward flight." Keanu rested a hand on the table, his expression thoughtful. "You did it, Frank," he whispered. "They're still flying." Across the room, Maya noticed him and gave a small nod. "He'd be proud," she said. Keanu looked around one last time, taking in the faces of men and women building, laughing, and creating together. Then he turned toward the camera crew who had come to document the nonprofit's progress. They asked if he wanted to record a short message for the video they were producing. He thought for a moment, then nodded. The room quieted as he stepped into the soft light of the hangar. The faint sound of tools fading. Behind him, Keanu stood before the camera, his tone gentle and steady. "Every dream deserves a chance," he began, "especially from those who once fought to protect ours." His voice echoed softly through the hangar, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to be heard. Around him, the workers paused, listening. The hum of tools faded into silence. He continued, "I watched a man named Frank Dalton prove that purpose doesn't end when the uniform comes off. It changes shape. It becomes mentorship, invention, compassion. He showed us that the human spirit, once it decides to rise, can lift others higher than any machine ever could." He paused, eyes drifting upward to the drone models suspended from the ceiling. "If there's one thing Frank taught me, it's that belief is contagious. You pass it on, and it multiplies. That's what this place is. A house built from belief." Maya watched from across the hangar, her eyes glistening. The camera operator gave a silent thumbs up. But Keanu didn't stop speaking. He turned slightly, looking toward the veterans working at their stations again. "If you're watching this," he said, "and you've ever felt like your time has passed, or that the world's moved on without you, I want you to remember Frank. He wasn't done, and neither are you." His words lingered in the still air before he added softly, "Keep building, keep believing, because every dream deserves a second mission." When the video ended, the hangar erupted in applause. Luis whooped from the back. "That's going viral for sure." Maya laughed through tears. Keanu smiled modestly, raising a hand as if to wave it off, then slipped away quietly toward the exit, just as Frank once did after every success. Outside, dawn was breaking. The sky blushed with gold and pale orange as the first light touched the concrete runway beside the hangar. Maya and a few of the younger veterans stepped outside to join him. She carried one of Frank's restored drones, the same model used in the early tests. "This one's been waiting," she said softly. "It's the last one he built before the upgrades." Keanu nodded. "Then let's fly it." They set it on the ground. The rotors spun to life, gentle at first, then stronger. As it lifted, the early sunlight caught its polished surface, and for a moment, it looked almost alive. Everyone watched in silence as it rose higher and higher. The reflection of light shimmered like a promise carried into the sky. Keanu looked up, his voice barely a whisper. "Fly high, Frank." The drone climbed until it became a single bright dot against the morning clouds, then disappeared completely into the golden haze. Inside the hangar, the camera crew captured the final shot. The text appeared over the image of the rising drone, dedicated to all veterans who keep creating. Long after the battle ends, soft piano music swelled, filling the air with quiet grace. The screen faded slowly to white. Then one final line appeared, centered and gentle. "If you believe every forgotten hero deserves a second chance, share this story and keep their dreams alive." The music lingered for a moment longer before fading into silence, leaving behind only the soft hum of a distant engine and the memory of a man who taught the world how to believe again.